Well, hello and welcome to the PMQ live update for today, which is April 19th. Just back from Italy with the U.S. pizza team. We took fifth in the world for pizza on the peel. We're so glad to bring that back. And actually, I want to see if my next guest has some tips for us in the future. I want to introduce the next guest for today's live update, Francisco. And is it Migoya? I didn't want to
Yes.
pronounce it
Yeah,
wrong.
no, it's correct. You got it.
Okay. So
Mhm.
you are the co-author and head chef for Modernist Cuisine, but the
Yeah,
co-author for Modernist Pizza book, correct?
correct. Yeah.
Okay, so why don't you tell us a little bit about your involvement? Well, tell us about yourself, how you came up, and then how you got involved with Modernist Cuisine, really quick.
Sure. I was born and raised in Mexico City, and I studied to become a chef both in Mexico and in France for a year. And I moved to New York City in 1998, and I started working in like the savory side of the kitchen, but I eventually made my way into the pastry side. It felt like a lot more what I enjoyed doing, and that's what I've mostly focused on since.
Right.
I lived for about 5 years in New York City, working in different restaurants there, and then I moved. I took a job as the executive pastry chef at the French Laundry in California. So it was French Laundry, Bouchon Bakery as well. I was there for a couple years, and then I moved back to New York, but this time upstate to go teach at the Culinary Institute of America, where I taught there for 8.5 years, and I was a professor there of baking and pastry. And I only left because I got a phone call from here. I always wanted to work at Modernist Cuisine when the first books came out in 2011. It was groundbreaking and breaking in so many ways. And I thought, if they ever do anything that is related to baking, bread, pizza, pastry, that sort of stuff, I felt like I was going to be a very good fit for it. But I never really pursued it because I didn't think it
Mhm.
was ever going to happen. But one day a recruiter from Modernist Cuisine called me, and it was pretty funny because they asked, "Have you heard of Modernist Cuisine?" I'm like, "Who hasn't?" At least in like the world where I was working in, it was just kind of a given, right?
Right.
Um, and so I started working here right at the beginning of 2014. So I've been here almost a little over 8 years. Our first book that I worked on completely was Modernist Bread, which came out in 2017, sorry. And then the second book, which came out last October 2021. So in 8 years, two books, pretty much. So
Well, and I'm not sure if a lot of people are familiar with the Modernist Pizza book. It is 3 volumes. Actually, I mean, I think the site does it. I like the by the number section. Okay, so you've got
mhm.
3 volumes, 35.5 pounds, and it is every ounce of that or every
Yeah,
gram. 14 chapters, over 1,700 pages, over 1,000 recipes, 3,700 photos. And I mean, that's kind of what I was wanting to get into with you is
mhm,
about you. What was your involvement? And I assume as a head chef, a lot in recipe creation, but
mhm.
all those recipes, obviously not 1,000 are all yours. How does
Right.
the recipe creation come about? Is it curation versus creation, and just what's
Mhm.
the process to make it in this book?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody necessarily owns a recipe unless, like, for example,
True.
the guy that patented ciabatta, right? Like that person owns the recipe. But for the most part, what we do is sometimes there's a starting point, and the starting point can be, we traveled to Italy 3 times in 2018, and we spoke to dozens of different pizzaiolos, and a lot of them actually share their recipe, whether it was the actual recipe or not. It's questionable, but for the most part, we want to assume that they were giving us the right numbers. And so it gave us a starting point for like hydration, for example, for salt percentages. Although for us, salt percentage should always be 2%. That's like across the board for any dough. 2% is I guess, the magic number we would call it. And then yeast, right? And so we also looked at fermentation times. And so in the end, you get all these recipes and you test them, and then you finesse them, and then you do experiments with those recipes to finally come up with a recipe. Because, for example, our master Neapolitan pizza dough, it didn't come from anybody in particular. There's nobody that we know that would make that specific method. We might be wrong because we didn't speak to everybody who makes Neapolitan pizza dough. But in our view, it was born from close to 100 different experiments with that dough. And in the end, it was one that was just so remarkable that we thought this has to be our master recipe. And we do include, for example, the VPN recipe, right? The
Mhm.
Verace Pizza Napoleon. They have like a set standard of, what the hydration should be, how much salt, how much yeast, how, basically all the steps from start to finish. So we did include that recipe for those people who had interest in it, who might want to make it. It's in there.
Yeah.
And then we also have more of the like Americanized version of a Neapolitan pizza dough, which is that, has a pre-ferment like a pouliche, and it's a 24 to 48 hour cold proof and so forth. So we have 3 different Neapolitan pizza recipes. So to answer your
Well, and
question,
that
go ahead. Mhm.
no,
To
you
ans-
go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, to answer your question, the recipes come from experimentation, and from the results from those experiments. So it's we might have a starting point that could come from many different places, but in the end, it has to be a recipe that we find solid for numerous reasons.
Okay, and that's the thing is that I'm only part of the way through this book too, and I've had it for a little while. Just
You
it
haven't
gets
read
in
it
the.
all, really? Come on.
I like the pictures, but no, but I mean that's the thing is it does have the history, the
Mhm,
recipes and the techniques, and it seems that you guys have it pretty well covered as far as like all the recipes. I
mhm,
didn't know if you were. There are a lot of interviews in there too. I think in that first volume.
mhm.
Which was great. Like people I knew and I didn't realize were in there. I'm like, oh, that's a nice surprise. So I
Right.
assume it's a big honor for these guys to get included in there. So I figured there's a lot of give and take because that's the pizza world that I know. So
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and I did want to let everybody know too that you can get a chance to win this. Actually, we're drawing for 2 people who are going to get a chance to win this 3-volume set on May 3rd. So sign up at pmq.com/modernist-in-may. So Modernist in May, but you can sign up there for your chance to win this volume and go through it yourself. I get sidetracked with jumping to the recipes is my main thing.
Mhm.
So we talked a little bit about what was the main inspiration for this? Is you guys Modernist bread was there.
Yeah.
Um, was it just? And you said if there was ever kind of a natural evolution in pizza, you were there, sign you up. Was it going to
Yeah.
be this all? Was this a plan to begin with? Or?
Well, it sort of evolved from the fact that our book, Modernist Bread, was at 5 volumes, and it was
Okay.
actually going to be much larger than 5 volumes. And so we had to make some decisions as to what could, basically be trimmed down or what could be removed completely. And we did that with a bunch of recipes that didn't make it to the book. But then as we were looking at our pizza recipes, because there is a pizza section in Modernist Bread, but it was going to be much larger than it currently
Mm,
is, because as we were looking at it, we thought, this is its own thing. This is not something that could be its own subject matter. There is a divergence in when you're making bread versus when you're making pizza. There's a crucial moment of real distinction between the two things, and that is after shaping into a ball or whatever pre-shape you gave. What happens after that is very different for pizza, and so we thought, this needs to be its own subject matter. And so it also seemed like a natural progression, mostly because we're talking, our bread book was fermented doughs, right? Fermented flour, yeast, all of that stuff. And so pizza sort of segues neatly out of in that direction.
yeah.
Although it has that other manipulation parts, other treatments that make it such a different item from bread. So that was where the idea and the notion came from. That.
And was it always? I guess you got to do it right. So you do the history, and if you're lucky, you can get 3 volumes.
Hmm.
You can get away with 3 volumes, I guess, if you're lucky. So,
Yeah.
what was I guess the first step in creating this? I guess maybe doing the history research, or
Mhm.
did you guys want a solid recipe first? I know you said you got some dough recipes down first. What was the step one in getting something like this rolling for pizza?
Well, this would have taken a lot longer if we would have taken one step at a time. There was a team of people that were working on what would be the history part, right? Because, for example, I'm not a historian, and sometimes when you get books from chefs or bakers and they talk about the history, it's fine and it's good. I mean, everybody has a good intention with doing that, but in our opinion, this needs to be something that is done by experts, by people who are
Right.
really, knowledgeable of finding that information, and getting down to the bottom of where pizza comes from. And pizza has such a murky past. It's murky only because its roots are, it's food for poor people, it's food for peasants. And so when it started to come to be, it's not like academics were very curious about what poor people were eating. Scientists really didn't care all that much at the time as to what the peasants were eating. It was just like, it wasn't an area of their concern. And so that's why you have at its root, at its beginnings, pizza, there's not a lot of documentation. The first document we found was a book from 1799. I mean, that was the first mention of pizza as we know it today. The term pizza does exist way before that, but it was meant to describe something completely different. Actually, it was meant to describe more of like a sweet pie or like a tart with like almond flour and dried fruit and so forth. And so the only thing it shares with pizza to this day is that it was round. So maybe that's more or less where the term pizza comes from. But again, that was something that, people had to really dig into books that aren't, in online libraries, that are actual, solid paperback books that are in libraries. And, that requires a good amount of work. In tandem, we're working in the kitchen here, working on what would be the experimental part, what would be the recipe development part. And so our role in the kitchen here was what I would consider the pedagogical end of things, meaning the things that you would learn and then apply, whether you're cooking pizza at home or in a pizzeria or in a hotel or a restaurant, because most of the time you're going to get pizza books. They're mostly intended for home bakers, and that's fine. That's great. But there are very few that are actually for pizzaiolos. And there are even fewer that are, a lot of hotels and restaurants that are not pizzerias are making pizza. They have different ovens. They have, they're not going to have a wood-fired oven. Typically, they're going to have kitchen ovens, which are slightly different from ovens you'd find in a pizzeria and ovens that you would find at home. And so we had to also develop recipes with that person in mind. A lot of people started to do pizzas during the pandemic because they realized it's a food that can be transported easily. It can go in a box and it's reheated. It doesn't suffer as much as other types of food do during transportation. And so that was what we were working on while historians and scientists were working on that side of the book.
Well, it's like you said, this thing's just kind of too big to do one step at a time. So, I mean,
right.
Did one side kind of inform the other ever when they were finding out about history? Did it kind of make you decide you had to include some styles that you didn't know, and actually kind of was there anything that surprised you that you found out in creating this?
Yeah, I think that
know before.
Yeah, there were some interesting historical recipes that, for example, we talk about pizza Campofranco, which is almost like a double crust pizza. It's an ancient form of pizza that you can still find it in Naples today, but people don't recognize it as such. But it is like an ancient form of pizza. It's even portrayed in some paintings that we found because we went to the Anthropological Museum in Naples. We were going through a museum, we were looking at the paintings, and we found it in a painting. And it's not something that you would find if you were just reading through books. It's something that we had to go in person to do. And so what that informed us to do was to search for a way to make it and search for a way to replicate it. And we have a recipe for it in our book if anybody's interested in replicating like this ancient, primitive form of pizza. And we did a bunch of historical recipes too. There was this really interesting recipe from Campbell's that has you making this crust that is almost like a biscuit. Then you pour Campbell's tomato soup on top, put American cheese on it, bake it, and that was pizza. And so we made it because you sort of have to make these things, and out of deep curiosity. But as far as it being like something that's going to have like a stellar part in the book, not really. But it does. Learning from the history is going to at least let you appreciate where pizza is now versus where it was in the 1950s, 40s in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to ask what is the most obscure thing you found, but
that was one of them for sure.
I was going to say that kind of might have been the winner right there.
That and bananas on top of pizza. That was more than obscure. It was disturbing on many levels.
I guess, I'm just picturing they just chopped it up like hot dogs and put it on there or something.
Yeah, it was actually so covered in bananas. It was like somebody really intended to put bananas on that pizza. And let me tell you, whatever you think how bad it tastes, it's worse. So.
Well, we talked about this is not necessarily. I mean, the recipes aren't kind of owned; they're out there, and this is less
Correct.
curation versus creation. But there were a lot of contributors that were
Oh,
spoken
sure.
to about the history and stuff. What was maybe one of your favorite? Could be a couple different people. One of your favorite contributors as far as the history. Somebody you spoke with,
Hmm.
or that somebody else spoke with that you read their answers. Who was a favorite contributor on the history story side of it, and then
Hmm.
maybe on the recipe that made it into the book. If
Yeah,
they're one and the same, that's fine. But
yeah. No, there's a group of people. Like I can see, there was a very interesting faction of pizzaiolos in Naples. Naples is like really deeply rooted in tradition and authenticity, terms that might be slightly hard to really define. But also, Naples is home to many innovators. I mean, it's interesting that there's that dichotomy in Naples. So, if we talk about Franco Pepe
oh
is
yeah,
in Caserta, and the man is a gentleman and he's a genius, and he has a very interesting background, which is uh, his family was into bread baking, and so he brings a lot of that philosophy and mentality to the table. We didn't really necessarily get a recipe from him, and respectfully, because he didn't want to share them. That is completely his prerogative. And
yeah.
but we did have recipes that are inspired by his pizza. So like you were
Hmm.
the cover of Volume 3 recipes. That is definitely one of his pizzas. That it's the margarita spagliata that he calls, or the mistaken margarita. So basically, it's a yeah. That's I made that one, but it's inspired by his idea of basically making like a almost like an upside down margarita. So it's cheese at the bottom, sauce on top. Um, there's
I got it.
so that's sort of his idea. There's another guy there, Diego Vitaliano, who also has a pizzeria in Naples, and he does a marinara spagliata, which is his interpretation of marinara. So again, there's a lot of innovation if you look for it. They don't call it out as such, but that's where they have, we're talking about a new style called canoto, which is the life raft, or like the big puffy rim crust. Carlos San Marco, who is also in Caserta near Naples, in where Naples is. Um, and so we have a lot of innovators doing that, but there's also a lot of innovation in the United States, and that is important to talk
Yeah,
about, because if you think about actual true styles of pizza, I think the United States has more variety of styles of pizza than anywhere in the world. Like you can look at them and identify them as such. And so, for example, for me,
yeah,
what was very special was learning, about like Detroit style pizza, but also knowing about what Sean Randazzo's contribution was to the
yeah,
world of Detroit pizza. And I think he put it on the map, because I've spoken to so many people who are like long-time Detroiters who maybe never had pizza, never started to hear about Detroit style pizza until Sean started to make it more popular and like an actual thing to be somebody from Detroit and proud of that particular pizza. And how it's sort of like spread like wildfire. And I learned from him. I took classes from him. It was really awful to hear that he passed away being so young.
yeah.
Um, but having his sort of story in our book, and having had a little bit of his knowledge and some of his passion, and just seeing the operation, to me was very special on many levels. And just the enthusiasm that he brought to the world of Detroit style pizza. But I have to give props to, for example, Chris Bianco, right? I mean that's,
Yep.
to me, that's some of the best pizza I've ever had. He was. We have a pizza that's inspired by him, the Pizza Rosa, which is, if you look at it on the menu and you just read the toppings, it doesn't sound like very much, but once you have it, it's, to me, I'm not going to be so dramatic to say it's life changing, but it was eye opening on so many levels. The simplicity of three ingredients together on a pizza, and how delicious that pizza can be.
Yeah.
Uh, and then you go to Rasa in New Jersey with Dan Richer, and that's also, there's a reason why they said that New York Times article that the best pizza in New York is in New Jersey. That upset so many people. It's crazy, because people feel so strongly about it. They're, I guess it's like your team, like it's like your sports team, and people root for it. And suddenly somebody from New Jersey gets like the front cover of the dining section of the New York Times saying the best pizza in New York is in New Jersey. So,
Uh,
but
well,
it's so
we
good.
Yeah, we have the same saying for our neighborhood too. It's like the best pizza in Oxford's in Sardis. So
Hmm. Yeah.
hey, hopefully it drives people to be better, and hopefully this is your chance, guys. You guys can get this book and learn all the secrets. Sorry, I put our faces there, but go the Modernist Pizza in May giveaway. I'm going to move that, but sign up, guys. It's free. I fully intended to sit here and just kind of go through this book and ask you questions about it, but there's just no way because I've got 3 volumes, and each of these weigh 10 pounds at least. It's
Yeah.
not like it's easy holding this up.
It's a workout. It's so that you get your calorie burn at the same time.
Absolutely, and what I really also did like, one of the things I do love about it too is just the kitchen manual that comes with
Oh,
it.
sure. Yeah.
This thing's just in itself a lifesaver.
People ask us if we just sell that, and we're like, no. I mean, you got to buy the whole book. So
I can imagine because it's a lot of the information in the books just put right there
right,
at a glance,
right.
but there's so much more. And like I said, I get distracted because I'm jumping from place to place, and that's the beauty of it. I'm sure there's going to be
Oh,
pages
sure.
I will find years from now that I have yet to see. So,
And that's sort of
and
the
I'm
idea. That's the idea, is that it's a book that you don't read in once. You pull it out, you look at it, you read a couple of things, you find a recipe. It's sort of like an ongoing thing is the way I see it. I mean, I had to read it from start to finish, of course, but I feel like somebody can do that too, or it's more of like a check-in every now and then, sort of get inspired and get ideas and get some information from.
absolutely, and that's I'm glad you said that because now I don't feel bad for kind of doing it
No,
that way. It's
sure,
um,
sure.
I mean, do you have a favorite recipe in the book? I guess let's just broaden it out. What's your most favorite, your favorite unique takeaway from this book? Maybe it's a pizza hack or something, or a recipe.
Well, let's see. I mean, it's very hard to distill it into one thing,
I know
right? Because
that's a
there's
terrible
so much
question.
of that. Uh, well, I mean, I think let me say that, technique wise, as far as something that is really engaging to me for the execution, the method, the technique, is Neapolitan pizza. And I think that I can also say that it's not my favorite pizza to eat. I love it. Don't get me wrong.
Hmm.
But it's not. If it was my last meal on this planet, I would probably select different pizza. It wouldn't be Neapolitan. Uh, but I sort of like the adrenaline you get from getting like a really beautiful pizza in 60 seconds, and being able to do that over and over and over again is to me, it's beautiful. It's a challenge that I love doing every single time that I can. Um, but as far as a single takeaway, I mean, there's probably some myths in there that we sort of talked about. Not sort of, we did talk about. Um, there is going to be some people with very strong feelings and opinions about cooking with fire, like wood fire versus not using wood fire, and so we weigh in on that.
Hmm.
Does the water matter? There's going to be people who are going to tell you you have to use water from New York City, even though New York City has 5 different watersheds. So which watershed do I get my water from to make the best pizza or the best bagels? So there's some of that, some of those sort of stories and beliefs that don't really match up. But for example, another one that was I think valuable is there's a big fixation with having fresh mozzarella, consumed the day it's made, for best quality. And so, there's even some pizzerias that fly their cheese in from Italy every day, and the expense of that is just insane. So we thought, okay, let's take a look at this and see if it's worth it, it's worth it. Go ahead and definitely spend whatever it costs to do that. So we tested fresh mozzarella at different, ages, if you will. So when it was just made, 8 hours, 12, 24, and then every 24 hours up to 30 days. And so how did we test it? We tested it through a machine that's called a texture analyzer. So it's a machine that basically is going to test, how the cheese stretches. We also tested melting times, melting texture after a certain temperature. And so it turns out that actually the freshest mozzarella does not bake as well as one that is at least 10 days old. It's like 10 days seems to be the sweet spot of the cheese melting and stretching the most, and giving you the best texture, versus something that is younger is probably not going to have as much stretch, probably not going to bake as well. It's going to release a lot more of the serum. Where old like 10-day cheese is that to us was a sweet spot, and so we were able to experiment with that because that's what we do here, and it's the sort of thing that's like we're going to show you how we did our experiment, what the cheese looks like in these different days, and why it's a good idea to wait a little bit before you actually use your cheese. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, the word itself is the cheese is called fresh mozzarella, right? I mean, so it gives you these ideas of it has to be like, you milk the cow, you make the curd and the cheese in the same day, and that's not within the realm of things that has to happen for you to be able to have a wonderful mozzarella cheese. And so there's things like that we spent a lot of time testing to give those results in that opinion, right? And same goes for testing different flours. There's people who really like the flours they use, but something that's going to happen with us as and just anybody is you're going to have a particular flour that you use that you're going to swear by, and that's because you've learned how to make that flour work.
Right.
It's what you have easily accessible, and you're going to do the same thing with your oven and the same thing with your mixer, and you're going to swear that is the reason why you're making great pizza. And the reason why you're making great pizza is maybe not necessarily that. It's because you've learned how to work around what you have, and so that is an important thing to recognize as somebody who's making pizza for 20 years. It's like, no, this Blodgett that I've been using, it's 50 years old and it works great. It's like, it might be good, but you're essentially what you're doing is like you made it work. It's you, it's not the oven, right? For the most part. And so these are just important realizations of what experimentation does. Now, you can tell people facts until you're blue in the face. If people choose to ignore it or not buy into it, that's fine, but you can only do so much, right? You can bring the horses to the water, but you can't make them drink. So that's we're hoping that our message will be heard. It all came from science background. We have obviously we will give our opinion if we think something tastes good, right? But that is subjective. That is always going to be completely subjective because it's determined by humans, and that in and of itself will have a certain flaw. When we measure things with scientific machinery, it's giving us numbers. So we're measuring volume, we're measuring, strength of the dough. These are numbers that our computer is giving us that are reliable. And we don't just do like a single test. We typically do between 5 and 10 tests over the same thing to get an average of an average number for results that could be more accurate. So it all comes from that. So.
Well, I definitely like that because it is taught to us numbers matter. It's precise. Mm-hmm. It's all this, but you also have to account that it's not always going to be that precise. That people factor.
Right.
A lot of people do forget that maybe it is that shitty oven. That it's not that. It's how you deal with that oven is why it tastes that way, and nobody else can do it but you. It's like those movies where the guy, he's the only one who can turn his car on. I can't remember what movie it is, but
right, yeah, it is.
He's the only one who knows.
Exactly.
So, I mean, I definitely appreciate all this. I had so many more questions. I know you're a busy guy, but is there anything in the future coming up for Modernist Cuisine we should keep an eye on? I know that there was actually, I did come across this too, that I guess there's a 3-day intensive traditional Modernist Neapolitan thing going on in July. That
yes.
You were okay, making sure it wasn't last July.
No, it's this July. It's going to be in Maryland at the Mara Forni Education Center, Training Center.
Yeah.
So.
We had a competition up there. That was it's a great place, guys. If you go to pizzauniversity.org, you guys can find the information there and their events. But definitely, I mean, what are you going to be teaching there? It says Modernist and Neapolitan pizza courses.
Yeah, so everything. The focus is going to be, we're going to be making a bunch of different doughs, but it's all going to be Neapolitan style pizza. So we're going to be doing traditional, but we're also going to be doing modernist. We're going to do the Neo-Neapolitan, the so-called Neo-Neapolitan. We're going to do a bunch of different sauces. Again, we're doing classic, but we're also doing modernist and versions of those, different toppings and so forth. So it's going to be kind of like a 3-day immersion in the world of Neapolitan pizza dough.
That's great. It's a great place up there too.
Great. I haven't been, but I've heard.
Leo Spazzeri's there now too, I believe, right? I think.
I don't know, but it could be.
Well, check if anybody wants to get out there, go to pizzauniversity.org and check it out. Francisco Migoya, July 13th through 15th, I believe. So there's some seats available, but not many, guys. So check it out. And again, check out Modernist Pizza in May, or pmq.com/modernist in May for your guys' chance to win this. And also there's Modernist Pizza Podcast that I do need to be plugging a little more of, guys. Go check this place out. They're getting ready to start their second season. It is pretty much anything you want to know about pizza in a podcast. You can find it in all those wonderful places right there. And you can also find all previous episodes as well. So check it out, guys. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the future, but I did want to thank Chef Francisco Migoya, head chef at the Modernist Cuisine and co-author of Modernist Pizza. We look forward to more great works coming from you guys over there, and you especially. So thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. And you guys tune in again May 3rd to see. We're going to pull 2 winners to see who wins this wonderful. I don't even want to call it a cookbook. What would you call it?
My God, tomes? I don't know.
Tomes.
Yes.
I'm going with that one. I love it. Pizza tomes. All right.
Yes.
All right. Well, sign up today for your chance to win and tune in on May 3rd. Thanks again, and I'll let everybody go. Thanks again,
Thanks,
Chef.
man.
I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you very much. Bye.